In this book, in today's lesson, we're going to be covering studying and using important details to describe yourself. Over the past few weeks, we've been using the novel The Giver, which is what we're actually using today. I want students to take a few minutes to think about the person that comes to mind when they think about The Giver. And after that, I want students to draw a picture of the first thing that comes to mind as well. They can go together. All right, I will share my initial reaction to thinking about The Giver. The first thing I think about is the memories the author describes, specifically the sailboat sailing on the lake, which is the picture I drew as well. And if you notice a few things, when we were reading about this in the book The Giver, it was very descriptive when Jonas was giving the memory to Gabriel, and he described this bright turquoise water, which is always stood out to me quite a bit. And then he also described that they were sailboats on a lake. So what I visualized in my mind was bright blue turquoise water, a sailboat surrounded by grass and in a lake. These pieces of information are important details. Sorry for the words there. They're important details that describe our setting. All these components make up the setting of the memoir. So we have the water, boat, and the overall lake. Right? Keeping that in mind, let's go over some strategies we can use to take these details out of text and use them to describe our overall of a section of text. So the first thing you want to do is read text, and as you're reading it, think about different things that you're visualizing in your mind, and then we're going to draw a picture of that at the end and formulate a sentence that is an overall description of the setting. All right, this says, all right, now I'm going to read over a section of The Giver. As I'm reading this, I'm going to keep in mind that I'm looking for details that are helping me visualize the setting. And when I come across a key detail, I'm going to highlight it. All right, let's get started. Jonas hurried through the door and found himself in a comfortably furnished living room. It was not unlike his own family unit's dwelling. Furniture was standard throughout the community. Practical, sturdy, the function of each piece clearly defined. A bed for sleeping, a table for eating, a desk for studying. Right, I'm going to stop right there. There was an important detail up in the top. It says that he found himself in a comfortably furnished living area. This might help us later to describe our setting, and it's definitely helping me picture the room that he's in at the time. Right, next paragraph. All of those things were in a spacious room. Though each was slightly different from those in his own dwelling. The fabrics on the upholstered chairs and sofa were slightly thicker and more luxurious. The table legs were not straight like those at home, but slender and curved, with a small carved decoration at the foot. The bed in an alcove at the far end of the room was draped with a splendid cloth embroidered over its entire surface and intricate designs. Right, there's a lot of descriptive information and details in this paragraph. So I'm going to put a bracket around it because there's a lot of information, and then I'm going to highlight some really key details that I thought were really important and help me visualize more things in his drawing. It says that slightly different from those in his own dwelling. So that's not really what we're looking for. We're looking for something that will help us describe this dwelling. So let's look over some more information. It says the fabrics on the upholstered chair and sofa were slightly thicker and more luxurious. So they said that they were more luxurious. The table legs were not straight like those at home, but slender and carved with a small carved decoration at the foot. That is a pretty good detail, but I'm not sure if it's super significant. I'll underline that still though. It also says that it was draped with a splendid cloth embroidered over its entire surface with intricate designs. That's similar to the card decoration on the foot, but I still think it might help us when we go to draw our setting at the end. All right, let's move on to the next paragraph. It says, but the most conspicuous difference was the books. In his own dwelling, there were the necessary reference volumes that each household was a dictionary in the thick community volume, which contained descriptions of every office, factory, building, and committee, and the books of rules, of course. So looking at this paragraph, we can definitely highlight that there were books, but mainly that there was a difference between his books and the ones you see in this drawing. The rest of the paragraph isn't really describing much of his house per se. It's really describing what's not there. Next paragraph. The books in his own dwelling were the only books that Jonas had ever seen. He had never known that other books existed. So I'm not really finding too much important information about the setting that he's in now, so moving on to the next paragraph. It says, but this room's walls were completely covered by bookcases filled, which reached the ceiling. There must have been hundreds, perhaps thousands of books. Their titles embossed with shiny letters. So this is a really good detail because it's explaining that there's floor-to-ceiling bookcases, and there must have been hundreds of books, perhaps thousands, and they were embossed with shiny letters. That really helps me picture how the walls are looking, how many books there are, and even what the lettering on the books looks like. That's a great detail to highlight. Okay, next paragraph. It says, Jonas stared at them. He couldn't imagine what the thousands of pages contained. Could there be rules beyond the rules that govern the community? Could there be more descriptions of offices and factories and communities? He had only a second to look around because he was aware that the man sitting in the chair beside the table was watching him. Hastily, he moved forward, stood before the man, bowed slightly, and said, I'm Jonas. All right, I'm going to stop right there. And there was another detail I did want to point out. I think it's important to point out that there was a man sitting in a chair beside the table watching him. Obviously, we know that's the giver, but I think including that in our overall description of setting will help a lot because that's what he's seeing when he walks into the giver's dwelling. All right, let's move back to the graphic organizer. And let's find some important details that were on the section we just read. Right, so let's look back at the text again. The first thing we see is it's a comfortably furnished living area. We can write that in there. We're going to make that smaller. All right, now that we finished that, let's go back to the graphic organizer and start filling in some information. So let's actually go back to the text and see what we want to add to our details, our list of details that we use to picture and visualize the setting. So the first one we have highlighted here is comfortably furnished living area. And we can add that. Sure, I know. All right, this is on page 74. So this detail tells me that it is a living area, such as a living room, and it's comfortable. So I'm picturing like comfortable chairs, maybe a comfortable couch, something that looks homey and cozy. All right, let's keep going. The next thing we have highlighted is it's more luxurious than his dwelling. We could add that. It's more, we would need the other setting to compare it to at the time. So let's move on to explaining why it's more luxurious and the details about the setting that make it more luxurious than his. And we can add those into our setting. So we see that it has slender and curved table legs with decorations at the foot. So let's say more luxurious. Well, no, let's just say table legs. See, how do I want to describe it? We have multiple ways that we could add descriptions of the table legs. So we have slender and curved and small carved decoration of the foot. So we can put a decorated table leg. Seems like a better general description of what this table legs look like. Decorated carved table legs. Sorry. I was also on page 74. Right, let's go back. Next one was that the bed was in an alcove at the far end of the room and was draped with a splendid cloth embroidered over its entire surface. So that's an important detail because that tells us that there's an alcove in the corner or in the room. Alcove with bed covered with embroidered or embroidered, yes, embroidered. So again, we're getting another key descriptor. So I think we can start drawing the room a bit. So I see that he walks in and opens up, right? Because when he first walked in, he found himself in a comfortably furnished living area, much like his, not much, not unlike his own family dwellings. So, but everything he describes seems like his living area would need to be spacious, which it is because it wasn't highlighted, but this is a very important detail. It's a very spacious room. Add that. And let's add that we have our table. Sorry for the drawing. Not the best at it. We have our table and the decorated table legs. Try to make them look ornate, I guess, or fancily decorated. And we also know that there's an alcove with his bed. I'm going to put it over in this corner. Put his bed there. And has an embroidered cloth covering all of it. So I'm just going to take the yellow, I guess, to show that that is embroidered. Even though it's probably not a design that is on there, it still gives the idea and tells us that there is something important about that. And when we look at our details, we can see right away that there was embroidered cloth. Right. All right, next we see that there is a difference with the books. And it says that that the bookcases reach the ceiling. So even though there is a difference in books, we know that that's not really describing what was in his room or in his dwelling, but the bookcases were in his dwelling. And those are described very well. As they say, they reach the ceiling. Add that here. Maybe another, because they did say bookcases, so we know that we have more than one. And then there is also a detail in here that says it's filled with hundreds, perhaps thousands of books. So we can go ahead and draw books on here. But the key thing that we were talking about while we were reading this section was that they were embossed with shiny letters. So again, I'm going to take that yellow and just put those on some of the books. You don't have to put it on all of them. Just to emphasize that there were the embossed letters. And floor to ceiling bookshelves. These were both on page 74 as well. Again, it's important to add our page numbers. So if we need to find our details again, we know exactly where to look. All right, we're running out of room a bit, but I think we still can fit a few more. All right, the next thing that we highlighted in the last day actually was that there was a man sitting in the chair beside the table watching him. So let's go back and add that to our list. Man in chair next to table. Page 74. And it's important to note that he was watching him as well, I believe, because that tells us which direction he was facing. Even though the setting is more of the place they're in, I feel like saying that the man sitting there in the chair watching him kind of gives you a feeling of the room and kind of what Jonas is feeling when he walks into the setting. And since he is sitting there in the room, he could be a part of the setting. So let's draw the chair. And there's a man sitting in it. Again, sorry for the drawing. I don't feel like you have a smiley face though. Based on how they meet. Well, they meet in a pretty normal way, but I don't feel like he was a very smiley person at the time. And it says, hastily he moved forward, stood before the man, bowed slightly, and said, "I am Jonas." All right, and we do know that the man has a beard from previous readings. All right, now the last step is to describe your setting in a few sentences using important details. So let's think about this real quick. We have all of our details listed over the side, and we need to pick out the ones that we used to visualize our setting the most. So looking at our pictures can really help us as well. We know that the main parts of our picture are that there was a highlighter, that the bookshelves were significant and very important, and if there were, they walked into a comfortably furnished living area, which was the general description of the room, you could say. And then there was also all of these descriptions of different ways that this dwelling was more luxurious than others. So we can add that as one large detail, but we can also describe it as multiple ones because some of them are important details to note on their own. So let's say that in the text box. Now let's go on to describing our setting in a few sentences using our important details that we just covered. So using our important details on our list and our important details that we drew in our picture, we can connect the two and kind of get a better idea of what our setting is and how we can describe it. So we can get an idea of what our setting is using our picture and then know how we want to describe it using our list over on the side. And also we can refer back to our text on this slide. There we go, which is always a good thing to do. When you're using details, you always want to check that with what you wrote down in your list over here is correct. You want to make sure that it was a comfortably furnished living area. For example, a few minutes ago, I left out that an important detail was that the room was spacious. And if you read something out, it can affect the setting. So we always want to check back and double check our work and make sure that we haven't missed anything and we haven't incorrectly written something down. This one detail can change the entire setting. All right, so let's move on to the sentence. And let's say that the setting in Sun River on pages 74 to 75 can be described as, can be described as what? Let's think about that. So we want to look back to our details. What did we describe our setting as? So we have our detailed picture and we have our list of details. Let's say that it can be described as a comfortable, luxurious living area. Okay, so we have setting in the giver on pages 74 to 75 can be described as a comfortable, luxurious living area. Put there. And I think we can end the sentence here. Let's say this dwelling actually, let's be more specific than that. Let's say the dwelling Jonas is in has what? What did he describe in his observation? He describes decorated table legs, an alcove, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I think that the bookshelves is an important thing to point out right now because he described it in detail and he was amazed by the amount of books and he had never seen those before and he couldn't imagine what was in them. So let's say the dwelling Jonas is in has, let's say was in. This is past tense. Was in has bookshelves with that reach the ceiling and had how many books? Let's look back. It says there must have been hundreds, perhaps thousands of books. So he doesn't give a specific number. So I think it's safer to say that had many books. All right, let's see how many details we have in this so far. So we have that it is a comfortable, luxurious living area. 1 and 2, it's a dwelling. There's bookshelves that reach the ceiling and have had many books. I still think we can add more though. So let's go back to our drawing and we see that there is a table and, excuse me, a table and an alcove with the bed. So we can say Jonas also notices the, let's see, the alcove and notices the alcove and table. Let's say the alcove with a bed and the table had luxurious details. So that kind of covers the embroidered blanket or cloth that was laid over the bed. It also covers the legs that were on the table. All right, the next thing I will do is split the students up into groups and they will work on their own graphic organizers together on a poster version of this graphic organizer. And I will also assign them a portion of the text and they will read it together and then pick out the important details using the strategies we just went over and I just modeled. And then they will also draw a picture of their setting and describe it using at least 4 of the details that they outlined on the side over here. And the last thing that I want students to do is I want them to share their posters. So they are going to present them as a group and describe the details that they found and how they use them to visualize the setting. Lastly, I will assess the students using a rubric to go over or that covers the graphic organizer that they did and the poster. It will assess the sentence that they wrote, the details that they chose, and the overall setting that they described. And also, I will assess students as I am walking